The morning sun peeked through the blinds of Riverside Diner, casting long shadows across the worn checkered floor. The smell of bacon and pancakes filled the air as the breakfast rush was in full swing. For 3 years, Tanya had worked at this diner, becoming a familiar face to the regulars who stopped by for their morning coffee and eggs. Tanya wasn't having a good day. Her alarm had failed to go off, making her rush out of her apartment without properly doing her hair. Her car had made that weird noise again, the one that meant an expensive repair was coming soon. And now, her fellow waitress had called in sick, leaving Tanya to handle the entire morning shift alone. "Order up," yelled the cook, ringing the small bell at the kitchen window. Tanya hurried over, balancing 3 plates along her arm with the skill that comes only from years of practice. "Here you go, folks," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes as she set down plates of steaming food in front of an elderly couple. They were regulars, the kind who tipped well and didn't make a fuss. The diner was busier than usual for a Monday. Every red vinyl booth was filled, and the counter seats were occupied by people hunched over coffee mugs and newspapers. The jukebox in the corner played an old country song that nobody was really listening to. Tanya wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. Her feet already ached, and it wasn't even 9 a.m. yet. The manager, a balding man with perpetually rolled-up sleeves, poked his head out from the back office. "Tanya, Table 6 has been waiting for menus," he said, pointing to a booth in the corner. Tanya nodded, grabbing a stack of laminated menus and making her way over. As she passed by the window tables, she noticed a family with young children making a mess with syrup, and inwardly groaned thinking about the cleanup she'd have to do later. The bell above the door jingled, and Tanya glanced over to see a well-dressed black man enter the diner. He wore a crisp button-up shirt and slacks that looked expensive, not the usual attire for Riverside Diner when most customers showed up in jeans and t-shirts. He carried a leather briefcase and checked his watch as he looked around for a place to sit. The man found an empty booth in Tanya's section and sat down, placing his briefcase beside him. Tanya saw him but continued delivering the menus to table 6 first. She'd get to him when she could. 10 minutes passed. Tanya refilled coffees, took orders, and delivered food to several tables. The well-dressed man waited patiently, occasionally looking around for service or checking his phone. Another 5 minutes went by. The man raised his hand, trying to catch Tanya's attention as she bustled past with a coffee pot. She pretended not to see him. Something about this man made her uneasy, though she couldn't or wouldn't admit to herself why. "Tanya, coffee refill at the counter," the manager called out. Tanya nodded and headed to the counter, deliberately taking the long way around to avoid passing the well-dressed man's table. A couple who had arrived after the man was already giving their orders to Tanya. The well-dressed man noticed this, his brow furrowing slightly. He straightened in his seat and looked directly at Tanya, who was now only a few feet away taking an order. "Excuse me," he said politely. "I've been sitting here for some time now." Tanya glanced at him but continued writing down the order from the couple. "I'll be with you in a minute," she said curtly. After finishing with the couple, Tanya walked past his table again, this time carrying plates to another booth. The man's patience was visibly wearing thin. "Miss," he called out more firmly, "I've been waiting for 20 minutes while others who came in after me have already ordered." The diner had grown quieter. A few customers looked up from their meals, sensing the tension building in the room. The cook peered out from the kitchen, spatula in hand, watching the scene unfold. Tanya stopped in her tracks. The coffee pot trembled slightly in her hand. This day was already bad enough without some fancy-dressed man telling her how to do her job. She turned slowly, facing him with a tight smile that didn't hide her irritation. "I'll get to you when I can," she said, voice strained. "We're short-staffed today." The man looked around the diner, noting how Tanya had served nearly everyone else already. His eyes met hers, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a challenge, a confrontation brewing that would soon change both their lives forever. The well-dressed man took a deep breath. He'd been in situations like this before, too many times to count. He straightened his tie and looked directly at Tanya. "I understand you're busy," he said, his voice calm but firm. "But I've been sitting here watching you serve people who came in after me. Is there a reason for that?" Tanya clutched her coffee pot tighter. The other customers had gone quiet, their forks paused midway to their mouths. Even the sizzling from the kitchen seemed to have died down. "Like I said, we're short-staffed," Tanya replied, louder than necessary. "You'll get your turn." She turned away, but the man spoke again. "My name is Raymond," he said, "and I'd like to order now, please." Something about his polite insistence made Tanya's cheeks burn. She turned back with a huff and pulled out her notepad. "Fine. What'll it be?" she asked, pen hovering above the paper, not making eye contact. "I'd like to see a menu first," Raymond said. Tanya realized she hadn't given him one. She sighed loudly, tucked her pen behind her ear, and walked over to the stack of menus. She slapped one down on his table and walked away without a word. Raymond opened the menu, though his attention was no longer on breakfast. He'd planned to have a quick meal before heading to an important meeting. Now he was watching Tanya chat and laugh with an older white couple at the counter while refilling their coffee cups. A few minutes later, Tanya returned. "Ready to order now?" she asked, her tone making it clear she had better things to do. "Yes," Raymond said. "I'll have the breakfast special with scrambled eggs and coffee, please." Tanya scribbled down his order and walked away without confirming anything. Raymond watched her hand the order to the cook and then promptly serve 3 other tables their meals. His stomach growled. He checked his watch. He'd been in the diner for nearly half an hour and still didn't even have a cup of coffee. At the table next to his, a young white man who had entered at least 10 minutes after Raymond was already halfway through his pancakes. Raymond caught the man's eye, and the customer quickly looked away, uncomfortable. Raymond pulled out his phone and checked his emails, trying to distract himself. He had an important meeting later that morning about possibly acquiring this very diner, along with several others in the local chain. The owner was looking to sell, and Raymond's restaurant group was interested. 15 more minutes passed. Raymond watched as Tanya brought food to yet another table that had arrived after him. His patience was running thin, but he remained composed. This wasn't the first time he'd experienced this kind of treatment, and he knew from experience that losing his temper would only make him look bad. Finally, Raymond raised his hand again. "Excuse me," he called out. "I've been waiting for quite some time now." Tanya, now at the counter refilling coffee cups, pretended not to hear him. "Excuse me," he said again, louder this time. The diner went quiet again. Tanya couldn't ignore him any longer. She walked over, coffee pot in hand. "Yes," she said, her voice tense. "I ordered nearly 20 minutes ago," Raymond said calmly. "Other customers who came in after me have been served. I haven't even received my coffee yet." A few customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. An older woman at a nearby table shook her head slightly. "The kitchen is backed up," Tanya said defensively. "Not everything is about you." "This isn't about me," Raymond replied. "This is about fair service. I've been watching you serve everyone else promptly. I've been patient and polite, but I can't help but wonder why I'm being treated differently." Tanya's face flushed red. "Are you accusing me of something?" "I'm simply stating what I've observed," Raymond said. "I'd like to speak with the manager, please." The cook poked his head out from the kitchen window, sensing trouble. The elderly couple at the counter exchanged glances. Tanya's hands began to shake slightly, coffee sloshing in the pot she was still holding. "You think you can just come in here in your fancy clothes and tell me how to do my job?" she said, her voice rising. "You think you're better than everyone." Raymond remained seated, his expression calm despite the tension building in the air. "I don't think I'm better than anyone," he said. "I just expect to be treated with the same respect as your other customers. Now, could you please get the manager?" The confrontation had reached a breaking point. Everyone in the diner could feel it. Something was about to happen that couldn't be undone. The clock on the diner wall ticked loudly in the sudden silence. Tanya's knuckles were white around the handle of the coffee pot, her face a mix of anger and embarrassment. The other customers watched, forks frozen midway to their mouths, the clinking of cutlery completely stopped. "I don't need to get the manager," Tanya said through gritted teeth. "I can handle this myself." Raymond kept his voice level. "I'd prefer to speak with the manager about the service I've received, or rather, haven't received, today." A couple sitting nearby exchanged uncomfortable glances. An older man at the counter slowly put down his newspaper, watching the scene unfold with concern in his eyes. "Oh, so that's how it is." Tanya's voice rose. "You come in here, acting all important in your fancy suit, and the first thing you do is try to get me in trouble." Raymond shook his head. "That's not my intention at all." "Sure it isn't," Tanya scoffed. "Let me guess, you're going to claim I didn't serve you because of how you look, right?" The diner grew even quieter, if that was possible. A teenage girl in the corner booth pulled out her phone discreetly and began recording the interaction. "I didn't say anything about that," Raymond replied calmly. "But now that you mention it, I have to wonder why everyone who came in after me has been served, while I'm still waiting." "Maybe because they're not demanding and difficult." Tanya shut back. The cook leaned further out the kitchen window. "Tanya," he called out in a warning tone, "maybe you should." "No, Pete, I'm handling this," she snapped without looking at him. Raymond placed his hands flat on the table. "I've been nothing but polite since I walked in. All I've asked for is the same service everyone else is getting." A woman with a young child got up from her table and quietly paid her bill at the register, clearly wanting to leave before things escalated further. "You know what your problem is?" Tanya stepped closer to Raymond's table. "You people always think you're being mistreated, always looking for something to complain about." A collective intake of breath swept through the diner. Raymond's expression hardened, but he kept his composure. "What do you mean by you people?" he asked quietly. Tanya realized her mistake too late. Her face flushed deeper red, but instead of backing down, she doubled down. "You know exactly what I mean," she said. "Customers who think they're too important to wait their turn." "That's not what you meant," Raymond said. "And we both know it. Now, I'm going to ask one more time. Please get the manager." "The manager's not here," Tanya lied. "I'm in charge right now." The cook called out again. "Tanya, don't." "Shut up, Pete," she yelled over her shoulder. Raymond slowly stood up. At his full height, he was tall and imposing, though his posture remained non-threatening. "I find that hard to believe. This establishment must have someone in charge. If not a manager, then an owner." Something about his calm confidence in the face of her hostility made Tanya snap. Years of bottled-up anger, stress from her personal problems, and the pressure of the morning rush. It all came to a boiling point. "You want service?" she hissed. "Fine, here's your coffee." In one swift, terrible motion, Tanya lifted the coffee pot and flung its steaming contents directly at Raymond's face. Time seemed to slow down. Raymond's eyes widened in shock as the hot liquid asked through the air. He raised his hands too late to block it. The coffee splashed across his face, soaking into his white collar and expensive suit jacket. For a split second, the diner was completely still. Then chaos erupted. "Oh my God!" a woman screamed. "Someone call 911. Another voice shouted. Raymond stumbled backward, coffee dripping down his face. His skin reddened instantly from the heat, but he didn't cry out. Instead, he reached for the napkin dispenser on his table, his movements methodical despite the shock and pain. The teenage girl in the corner was still recording, her hand over her mouth in horror. The cook rushed out from the kitchen with a wet towel. Customers stood up from their tables, some moving to help, others backing away from the scene. And Tanya stood frozen, the empty coffee pot still in her hand, the enormity of what she'd just done slowly dawning on her face. The diner erupted into chaos. Raymond stood perfectly still, dabbing at his face with napkins as coffee dripped down onto his once pristine suit. His calm in the storm was somehow more shocking than if he had shouted or lashed out. "Someone get ice." The cook yelled, rushing from behind the counter with a clean wet towel. He handed it to Raymond, who nodded in thanks. Tanya still hadn't moved. The empty coffee pot dangled from her fingers, her face drained of all color as the reality of what she'd done sank in. I didn't mean to," she stammered, but her words fell flat in the commotion. A middle-aged woman from a nearby booth approached Raymond. "I'm a nurse," she said, gently taking the wet towel from his hands. "Let me help. We need to cool those burns right away." Raymond allowed her to dab at his face while he continued to blink rapidly, his eyes red and irritated from the coffee splash. "I'm calling the police," announced an elderly man, pulling out his phone. That was assault, plain and simple. The teenage girl who had been recording everything piped up from her corner booth. I got it all on video, she said, her voice shaking slightly. He didn't do anything wrong. The front door of the diner burst open, and a short, balding man in a button-up shirt and tie rushed in. "What in the world is going on out here?" he demanded, looking around at the scene of confusion. "Doug," the cook called out. "Thank goodness you're here." So there was a manager after all, Raymond thought, pressing the cool towel against his burning skin. Doug took one look at the situation, Raymond with his coffee-stained suit, Tanya still holding the empty pot, customers standing around in shock, and his face fell. "What happened?" he asked, though the evidence was clear enough. 3 customers began talking at once, explaining how Tanya had ignored Raymond, then lost her temper and thrown coffee at him. Doug raised his hands for quiet. "Tanya, in my office." Now, his voice was low but firm. Tanya finally snapped out of her stupor. She set the coffee pot down on a nearby table with a shaking hand. He kept demanding. She tried to explain, but Doug cut her off. "We'll discuss it in private," he said sharply, then turned to Raymond. "Sir, I can't begin to apologize enough for this incident. Please come to the back where we can get you properly cleaned up, and I'll call for medical assistance." Raymond nodded, wincing slightly as the pain from the burns began to set in more fully. "Thank you," he said, his voice surprisingly steady. As Doug led Raymond toward the back office, Tanya trailing behind them with her head down, Raymond reached into his jacket pocket. The coffee had soaked through, but the leather card case inside had protected its contents. He pulled out a business card and handed it to Doug. "Before we go any further," Raymond said, "I think you should know who I am." Doug took the card and read it. His eyes widened, and he went pale, almost as white as Tanya had been moments before. You're Raymond Washington," Doug stammered, "of Washington Restaurant Holdings." Tanya peered over at the card, confusion on her face. "Yes," Raymond replied simply. Doug looked like he might faint. "But that means—" "That I own this diner," Raymond finished for him. "Or more accurately, I'm in the process of purchasing the entire Riverside Restaurant Group, which includes this establishment." The news rippled through the diner as customers who overheard began whispering to each other. Tanya's face crumpled as she realized the full extent of her mistake. "I had planned to visit unannounced," Raymond continued, dabbing at a coffee stain on his sleeve, "to see how the restaurants operate on a normal day, before finalizing the paperwork this afternoon." Doug looked as though someone had punched him in the stomach. "Sir, we had no idea. Please, let me assure you this is not how we typically treat our customers." "Apparently it is how you treat some customers," Raymond replied evenly, looking directly at Tanya, whose eyes were now filled with tears. The nurse who had been helping Raymond spoke up. "Those burns need proper attention. This conversation can wait." Raymond nodded. "You're right." He turned back to Doug. "Let's continue this discussion after I've received medical attention, and I think we'll need to have a serious conversation about the culture in this establishment." As they walked toward the office, Tanya finally spoke, her voice barely audible. "I'm going to lose my job, aren't I?" Neither Raymond nor Doug answered her. The silence was answer enough. Within 20 minutes, the small diner had transformed into a scene of controlled chaos. An ambulance had arrived, its lights flashing against the front windows. 2 paramedics were tending to Raymond in Doug's office, applying burn cream to his face and checking his eyes for damage. Out in the dining area, customers huddled in groups, talking in hushed voices about what they'd witnessed. The teenage girl who had recorded the incident was showing her video to a police officer who had arrived shortly after the ambulance. "And you saw the whole thing?" the officer asked, looking up from the phone screen. "Yes, sir," the girl said. The waitress ignored him from the moment he walked in. Then she just snapped. In the cramped back office, Raymond sat in Doug's chair, a cold pack held against his cheek. The paramedics had assured him that the burns weren't severe, first degree mostly, with a small patch of second degree on his right cheek. His eyes had been flushed out and were still red but thankfully undamaged. "Mr. Washington, I cannot express how deeply sorry I am," Doug said for what must have been the 10th time. He stood awkwardly in the corner of his own office, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "This is completely unacceptable." Raymond nodded slightly, wincing at the movement. "What's going to happen to Tanya?" he asked. Doug blinked in surprise. It wasn't the question he'd expected. She's been suspended immediately, of course. And given what happened, termination is the obvious next step. And where is she now? Raymond asked. In the break room, Doug replied. The police want to talk to her. They're saying it's assault. Raymond was quiet for a moment, pressing the cold pack gently against his skin. How long has Tanya worked here? Doug seemed confused by the question. About 3 years, I think. But sir, surely you're not concerned about. And has there been any trouble before? Complaints from customers? Well, Doug hesitated. She's had a few customer complaints about her attitude. Nothing this serious. Nothing even close to this. The door opened and a police officer stepped in. Mr. Washington, I'm Officer Chen. When you're feeling up to it, I'd like to get your statement about what happened. Raymond nodded. I'm ready now. Do you want to press charges? Officer Chen asked directly. The question hung in the air. Doug held his breath. I need to speak with Tanya first, Raymond said finally. Both Doug and Officer Chen looked surprised. Sir, that's not necessary, Doug started to say. Actually, it is, Raymond countered. This isn't just about coffee being thrown in my face. This is about why it happened. Officer Chen frowned. Sir, regardless of why, assault is a criminal offense. I understand that, Raymond said. But before I make any decisions, I want to talk to her. 5 minutes later, Tanya was brought into the office. Her face was blotchy from crying, her uniform still stained with coffee splashes. She couldn't meet Raymond's eyes. Have a seat, Tanya, Raymond said, gesturing to a chair across from him. Tanya sat down stiffly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The room was crowded now. Raymond, Tanya, Doug, Officer Chen, and one of the paramedics who had insisted on staying to monitor Raymond's condition. I want to understand what happened out there, Raymond began, his voice calm. Tanya's chin trembled. I lost my temper. I'm sorry. The words came out barely above a whisper. That's obvious, Raymond said. But I want to know why. Why did you ignore me when I came in? Why did you serve everyone else first? And why did asking to speak to a manager push you over the edge? Tanya finally looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. I don't know, she said, but everyone in the room could tell she wasn't being honest. I think you do know, Raymond pressed gently, and I think it's important that you say it out loud. The silence in the room was heavy. Doug shifted uncomfortably. Officer Chen waited, pen poised over his notepad. Tanya's face crumpled again, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I made assumptions, she admitted, her voice breaking. When you walked in, all dressed up, I thought you'd be demanding. That you'd look down on us. That you'd be trouble. Because of how I was dressed, Raymond asked quietly, or because of the color of my skin. Tanya flinched as if he'd slapped her. A sob escaped her throat. Both, she whispered. And I was wrong. So wrong. The room fell silent after Tanya's confession. Raymond's face showed no anger, just a deep wariness that seemed to go beyond the physical pain of his burns. Outside the office, the diner had mostly emptied of customers, though a small crowd of onlookers had gathered outside, drawn by the ambulance and police car. Officer Chen cleared his throat. Mr. Washington, I need to know if you intend to press charges. All eyes turned to Raymond. Tanya stared at the floor, shoulders hunched as if preparing for a blow. Raymond was quiet for a long moment. The easy thing would be to say yes, he finally said. What happened today was assault, plain and simple. Tanya let out a small sob but didn't speak. But the easy thing isn't always the right thing, Raymond continued. He shifted the cold pack on his face and winced slightly. This isn't just about coffee or burns that will heal. It's about something much deeper. Doug nervously adjusted his tie. Sir, whatever you decide, Riverside Diner fully supports. Raymond held up his hand, cutting him off. What I saw today wasn't just one waitress having a bad day. I saw a culture where this kind of behavior was allowed to develop. He looked directly at Doug. You said there had been complaints about Tanya's attitude before. What was done about those? Doug's face reddened. We had talks with her. Talks? Raymond repeated flatly, and nothing changed. That's a management failure. The paramedic who had been quietly monitoring Raymond spoke up. Sir, I should check those burns again before we decide if you need to go to the hospital. Raymond nodded and allowed the paramedic to remove the cold pack and examine his face. The room was uncomfortably quiet during the examination. The swelling isn't too bad, the paramedic eventually said. But I'd still recommend getting checked at the hospital, just to be safe. I'll go, Raymond agreed. But first I need to finish this. He turned back to Tanya, who had been watching the examination with guilt written across her face. I came here today to see how this place really runs, Raymond explained. Not the polished version you show to someone when you know they're the boss, but the real day-to-day operation. And what I saw was troubling. It's not always like this, Doug protested weakly. Isn't it? Raymond asked. The customers who spoke to the police said Tanya's behavior toward me was obvious from the moment I walked in, and not one staff member stepped in to correct it. The cook, Pete, who had been hovering near the office door, stepped forward. I tried to say something, he said quietly. Too little, too late, Raymond replied. This isn't just about one incident or one employee, it's about a systemic problem. Raymond turned back to Tanya. I'm not going to press charges, he said. Tanya's head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief. You're not? No, but that doesn't mean there won't be consequences. Officer Chen put away his notepad. That's your right, sir, but we can still proceed with charges if you change your mind within the next few days. Raymond nodded in acknowledgement, then continued addressing Tanya. You're suspended without pay, effective immediately. During that time, you'll complete a comprehensive anti-bias training program that I'll personally arrange and pay for. Tanya blinked in confusion. I don't understand. You're not firing me. That would be the easy solution, Raymond said. Fire you, wash our hands of the problem, and pretend it never happened. But that doesn't solve anything. He turned to Doug. The sale of this restaurant chain will go through as planned. But there will be changes, significant ones. Every employee, from dishwashers to managers, will undergo the same training Tanya's getting, and we'll be implementing new policies and procedures to ensure nothing like this happens again. Doug swallowed hard and nodded. Yes, sir. Raymond stood up carefully, wincing at the movement. Officer Chen, thank you for your time. I'll be in touch if I decide to change my mind about the charges. As the paramedic helped Raymond toward the door, he paused and looked back at Tanya. This is your chance, he said quietly. What you do with it is up to you. 6 months later, Raymond sat at a corner table in the newly renovated Riverside Diner. The place looked different now, brighter, more welcoming, with fresh paint and new booths. But the biggest changes weren't the ones you could see. He checked his watch. She was due any minute now. As if on cue, the bell above the door jingled and Tanya walked in. She looked different too. Her hair was neatly styled, and she carried herself with a quieter confidence. She spotted Raymond and walked over to his table. Thanks for meeting me, she said, sliding into the seat across from him. Raymond nodded. How are you doing? Better, Tanya replied. The training program was harder than I expected. Not just the classes, but facing things about myself I didn't want to see. A young waitress approached their table with a warm smile. Good morning. Can I get you both some coffee? There was an awkward pause as both Raymond and Tanya registered the irony of the question. Then Raymond smiled. Yes, please. 2 cups. Thank you. The waitress poured their coffee and left them to talk. I heard the changes you've made here have been good for business, Tanya said, adding a splash of cream to her cup. Raymond nodded. Revenue is up 20% since the renovation and the new training programs. Turns out, when people feel truly welcome, they come back more often. Tanya stirred her coffee slowly. I didn't think I'd ever set foot in this place again, she admitted. After what happened, after what I did. Yet here you are, Raymond observed. Here I am. She took a deep breath. I wanted to thank you in person, not just for not pressing charges, but for making me face what I did, what I was. Raymond took a sip of his coffee. And what have you learned? Tanya looked out the window for a moment, gathering her thoughts. That I had biases I didn't even know about. That I judged people based on things that had nothing to do with who they really were. She looked back at Raymond. And that changed how I treated them, even when I didn't realize it. That's an important realization, Raymond said. The hardest part was admitting it to myself, Tanya continued. In my head, I wasn't that kind of person, you know. I thought only bad people had those thoughts. But we all have them. It's what we do about them that matters. A comfortable silence fell between them as they drank their coffee. Through the windows, they could see the diner was filling up with the lunch crowd. The staff moved efficiently, treating each customer with the same friendly attention. I've been working at a community center, Tanya said finally. Nothing fancy, just helping out with their after-school program. But it feels good, being useful again. Raymond nodded. I heard. They speak highly of you there. Tanya looked surprised. You checked up on me. I like to follow up on my investments, Raymond replied with a small smile. And that's what this was, an investment in change. Tanya's eyes grew misty. I don't deserve a second chance. Everyone deserves a chance to be better than their worst moment, Raymond said. But that's not why I'm here today. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. We're launching a new program at all our restaurants. Diversity ambassadors, people who share their experiences and help train our staff on creating a truly welcoming environment for everyone. He slid the envelope across the table. It's a real position, with a real salary, and I think you'd be perfect for it. Tanya stared at the envelope, then at Raymond. Me? But why would you trust me with something like that after what I did? Because you've done the work, Raymond said simply. You've faced your mistakes, learned from them, and grown. That's exactly the kind of experience our staff needs to hear about. Tanya's hand trembled slightly as she reached for the envelope. I don't know what to say. You don't have to decide right now, Raymond assured her. Take some time to think about it. He stood up, placing money on the table for their coffee. Sometimes the people who've made the biggest mistakes have the most powerful stories to tell. And those stories can change other people if you're brave enough to share them. As Raymond walked toward the door, Tanya called after him, Mr. Washington. He turned back. Thank you, she said, clutching the envelope to her chest. Not just for this opportunity, but for that day. As horrible as it was, it changed my life. Raymond nodded. Mine too, he said quietly. Mine too.